They say money screams, but wealth whispers. But on that humid Saturday at the Royal Bay Yacht Club, my wife was doing enough screaming for the both of us. There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a crowd of billionaires when someone breaks the unspoken code of decorum, and Jennifer was shattering it with every word. I was on my knees, my hands coated in a mixture of black marine grease and diesel fuel, staring into the open-engine bay of a classic 1960s Riva Aquarama. To anyone passing by, I looked like a man who spent his life struggling to pay rent, a grease monkey fortunate enough to breathe the same salt air as the elite. But appearances are the ultimate currency in a place like this, and I had been hoarding my change for a very long time. Look at you, David. Jennifer's voice cut through the air like a jagged piece of glass. I didn't even have to look up to see her. I could smell her perfume, that nauseatingly expensive French scent I'd bought her for her birthday, and I could see her designer sandals inches from my workspace. I told you that old jumpsuit was the only thing you'd ever be successful in. Honestly, it's embarrassing to even be seen in the same zip code as you. I wiped a smudge of oil from my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a dark streak across my skin. I finally looked up. Jennifer looked stunning, in that artificial, high-maintenance way she had perfected since she started finding herself at the local country club. Standing next to her was a man named Julian, a tan, silver-haired executive in a navy blazer and white linen pants who looked like he'd been vacuum-sealed into a lifestyle of leisure. He was holding a glass of chilled rose, looking down at me with the kind of pity you usually reserve for a stray dog with a limp. "Is this the husband?" Julian asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't even look me in the eye. He was too busy inspecting his own manicured cuticles. "I thought you said he was in industrial consulting, Jen. This looks more like manual labor." Jennifer let out a sharp, mocking laugh that drew the attention of the nearby tables at the outdoor bistro. Industrial consulting was just his way of making unemployed handyman sound fancy, Julian. He's obsessed with these greasy machines. He'd rather spend his day smelling like a gas station than actually providing a life for his wife. That's why I'm here with a real man today. Someone who actually belongs behind the velvet rope, not under the floorboards. I stayed silent, my fingers tightening around a chrome wrench. It's amazing how 10 years of marriage can be summarized by a woman who thinks a bank balance defines a soul. Jennifer had no idea that I had spent the last decade building a maritime logistics empire from a laptop in our basement while she was out networking with people like Julian. She thought the long hours were because I was a failing contractor. She thought the modest car I drove was because I couldn't afford a Mercedes. She never realized that I didn't need to prove I was rich because I actually was. "David, move your tools," Jennifer snapped, kicking a small plastic tray of bolts. "We're trying to get to the main pier for the regatta gala, and you're blocking the walkway with your whatever this junk is. You look pathetic. Even the club staff are staring at you. Do us all a favor and go find a garage where you belong before security realizes you don't have a guest pass." A group of younger club members, dressed in pristine white, paused nearby, snickering at the spectacle. I was a stain on their perfect Saturday. I stood up slowly, the joints in my knees popping. I'm 55 years old, and I've learned that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to lose. I looked at the Riva Aquarama, a boat I had spent 3 years restoring with my own hands, and then I looked at the woman I had once promised to protect. "The walkway is public, Jennifer," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "And as for the staff, I think they're doing just fine. Don't talk back to her, pal." Julian stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, tossing it onto the grease-stained deck of the boat. "Here, go buy yourself a shower and a burger. Try not to get any oil on the upholstery on your way out. Some of us actually pay dues here." Jennifer smirked, leaning into Julian's arm. "Come on, Julian. Let's go. I can't stand the smell of failure anymore. It's clinging to my dress." They turned to walk away, confident in their victory, leaving me standing there in my oil-stained coveralls. But they were heading toward the North Pier, the most exclusive section of the harbor, where the deep water berths were reserved for the titans of industry. They were heading exactly where I was going, just for very different reasons. I watched them strut down the weathered teak planks of the pier, their heads held high with the unearned confidence of people who live on credit and social standing. Jennifer was gesturing wildly, likely complaining to Julian about how her handyman husband had ruined her mood. I didn't rush. I didn't yell after them. I simply picked up the $20 bill Julian had tossed at me. I looked at the face of Andrew Jackson for a moment, then folded it neatly and tucked it into the pocket of my greasy jumpsuit. It was the easiest money I'd made all day, and I intended to use it for something poetic. I grabbed a high-end microfiber cloth and wiped the worst of the grime from my forearms. Underneath the oil, my skin was tanned and my muscles were hard from actual work, not the kind of vanity lifting Julian probably did at his boutique gym. I closed the engine hatch of the Revo with a satisfying, metallic thunk. The V8 engine was humming perfectly now, a low, predatory growl that signaled it was ready for the open water. I started walking. I wasn't heading for the exit or the parking lot. I followed them toward the North Pier. The security at the Royal Bay Yacht Club is legendary. There are 2 separate checkpoints just to get onto the Gold Dock, where the vessels with lengths exceeding 100 feet are moored. As I approached the first gate, I saw Jennifer and Julian being stopped by a young security guard named Brian. Brian knew me. Everyone who actually worked on the docks knew me, but he kept a professional face. "I'm sorry, ma'am, sir," Brian said, his hand resting on the gate's electronic lock. "This section of the pier is currently closed for a private arrival. Do you have a gold tier pass or an invitation from an owner?" Jennifer bristled, her face turning a blotchy red. "Do you have any idea who this is?" "This is Julian Miller, the Senior VP of Miller Acquisitions. We are meeting friends for the regatta. Now open the gate before I have your manager down here." Julian tried to play the cool executive. "It's all right, son. We're just heading to the lounge at the end of the dock. My firm is looking into a corporate membership here. I'm sure there's been a mistake." I stepped up behind them, staying just far enough away to avoid their smell of failure, but close enough to hear Jennifer's disgusted sigh when she realized I was still there. "Oh, for heaven's sake, David, are you following us?" she shrieked, turning around. "Go away. You're going to get us kicked out just by standing near us. Brian, tell this mechanic to leave. He's harassing us." Brian looked at me, then back at Jennifer. His eyes flickered with a hidden amusement that she was too blinded by rage to see. "Is he bothering you, ma'am?" "He's a nuisance," she snapped. "He's my soon-to-be ex-husband, and he's clearly lost his mind thinking he can walk onto the Gold Dock in those rags." I smiled at Brian. It was a small, knowing gesture. "It's fine, Brian. They're just confused about the layout of the club. I'm sure they'll find their way to the public beach soon enough." "The public beach?" Julian stepped toward me, his voice low and threatening. "Listen, you little grease monkey. I've stayed polite because of Jennifer, but if you don't turn around and walk back to your tool chest, I'm going to personally ensure you never work on another boat in this state. I have connections you couldn't even dream of." I looked past Julian's shoulder. Towering over the North Pier, slowly gliding into its berth with the help of 2 tugboats, was the Sovereign. It was a 180-foot masterpiece of steel and glass, a floating palace that I had spent the last 2 years commissioning in a shipyard in Germany. It was the largest yacht in the harbor, and today was its maiden arrival at its home port. The crowd at the bistro had started to migrate toward the railings to catch a glimpse of the behemoth. The sheer scale of the yacht made everything else in the water look like a toy. Jennifer's eyes widened as she saw it. Like a moth to a flame, she forgot all about me. "Look at that, Julian," she whispered, her voice filled with a greedy kind of awe. "That's the one people have been talking about. The ghost ship. No one knows who owns it. Imagine being on that deck. Probably some tech billionaire from the coast," Julian muttered, though his eyes were glued to the gold leaf lettering on the stern. "That's real power, Jen. That's the kind of man you should be talking to." "Exactly," she said, throwing a final, hateful glance over her shoulder at me. "Not some guy who smells like an oil spill. Now, Brian, open the gate. We want to get a closer look at the arrival." Brian didn't move. He looked at me, waiting for the signal. I nodded almost imperceptibly. "I can't let you through, ma'am," Brian said firmly. "But I can let him through." He stepped aside and held the gate open for me. Jennifer froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "What? You're letting him in? He's wearing a jumpsuit. He doesn't even have a wallet on him." "He doesn't need a pass, ma'am," Brian said, his voice echoing across the pier for everyone to hear. "He's on the permanent access list." I walked through the gate, the heavy steel clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back as I heard Jennifer screaming at Brian, her voice reaching a pitch that made the seagulls scatter. I walked down the long, empty stretch of the gold dock toward the shadow of the Sovereign. As I got closer, the massive sideboarding stairs of the yacht began to lower with a hydraulic hiss. A man in a crisp, white captain's uniform, flanked by 2 security guards in black tactical gear, stepped down onto the pier. This was Captain Miller, no relation to Julian, a man who had navigated the globe 3 times over. Behind me, I could hear Jennifer and Julian arguing with more staff, trying to push their way through. They were desperate to see the real power that was stepping off that ship. They had no idea they were looking at his back. The North Pier was suddenly silent, the kind of heavy, expectant quiet that precedes a lightning strike. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the harbor water against the massive hull of the Sovereign. I stood there, a man in a grease-stained jumpsuit, looking like a speck of dust against the backdrop of $100 million empire. Behind the gate, Jennifer and Julian were still putting on a show, their voices carrying over the water like a bad radio signal. "This is a mistake. He's a trespasser," Jennifer was shouting at the head of club security, who had just arrived. "He's a mechanic who's lost his way. You're letting a vagrant onto the most expensive dock in the country." Julian was right beside her, trying to look influential. "I'm calling the Commodore of this club. This is a liability. Look at him. He's probably going to try and strip the copper off that ship." I didn't turn around. I watched Captain Miller descend the final steps of the gangway. He was a man of iron and salt, and his eyes didn't flicker for a second when they landed on my oil-streaked face. He reached the pier, stopped exactly 3 paces in front of me, and snapped his hand to his cap in a sharp, military-grade salute. "Good afternoon, sir." The captain's voice boomed, clear and resonant. The crossing from the Atlantic was flawless. "The Sovereign is in peak condition and ready for your inspection. We've stocked the vintage cellar and the crew is at attention." The silence behind the gate became absolute. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Jennifer's head as her reality began to fracture. "Thank you, Captain," I said, my voice projecting easily back toward the crowd. I noticed a slight vibration in the Riva's port engine on my way in. "I'll have a full diagnostic report for you by morning. A ship this size deserves a perfect escort." The captain nodded. "Of course, sir. Your dedication to the machinery is why this fleet runs better than any other in the world. But if I may..." He paused, his eyes shifting toward the gate where Jennifer and Julian stood, frozen like statues in a museum of the arrogant. "We have a bit of a situation on your private berth. These individuals have been vocal. They claim to know you, though their tone suggests otherwise. Shall I have my security team clear the pier for your arrival ceremony?" I turned slowly. I wanted to see her face. I wanted to memorize the exact shade of gray it had turned. Jennifer was clutching the railing so hard her knuckles were white. Her mouth was half open, her perfect makeup looking like a mask that was beginning to melt. Julian looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and pull the pier in after him. "David." Jennifer's voice was a ghost of itself, a tiny, trembling thing. What is this? That's not yours. It can't be. You're a consultant. You're a handyman." "I told you, Jennifer," I said, taking a few steps toward the gate, the captain and his security detail flanking me like a royal guard. "I consult for some of the biggest maritime firms in the world. What I didn't tell you, because you never cared to ask, is that I own 3 of them. I like engines because engines are honest. If you treat them well, they take care of you. If you neglect them, they fail. You should have studied mechanics, Jennifer. You might have understood how relationships work." Julian tried to find his voice, but it came out as a pathetic squeak. "Look, Mr. David. Sir, there's been a massive misunderstanding. Jennifer, she gets worked up. You were tossing $20 at the owner of the club's largest endowment, Julian." I interrupted, pulling the crumpled bill from my pocket and letting the sea breeze catch it. It fluttered through the air and landed in the water between the pier and the boat. "Keep your change. You're going to need it for the legal fees." "Legal fees?" Jennifer gasped. "David, honey, let's just go on the boat and talk. I didn't know you were keeping all this from me. We can start over. I've just been so stressed lately." She actually reached through the bars of the gate, trying to touch my sleeve, the same sleeve she said smelled of failure only 10 minutes ago. I stepped back, out of her reach. "There is no we, Jennifer. I filed the papers this morning, before I put on this jumpsuit. And as for the boat..." I looked up at the towering bridge of the Sovereign. The only thing you're getting on today is a taxi. I turned to the club manager, who was standing nearby, looking terrified. Miles, these two are currently on my private pier without an invitation. I believe that's a violation of Club Bylaw 4.2 regarding harassment of gold tier members. I want their memberships revoked today, and I want them escorted to the parking lot. Not the bistro, not the lounge, the exit. Of course, Mr. Sterling, Miles stammered, frantically gesturing for his staff. Immediately. Right this way, ma'am. Sir. As the security guards moved in, Jennifer's shock turned into a desperate, screeching rage. The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. Jennifer began to scream, her voice echoing off the multi-million-dollar halls surrounding us. It wasn't the scream of a woman in pain. It was the sound of a social climber falling from the top of the ladder and hitting every rung on the way down. She lunged at the security guards, her designer handbag swinging like a flail, while Julian tried to hide behind a decorative potted palm, desperately pretending he wasn't with her. You can't do this to me, Jennifer shrieked, her finger pointing at me like a loaded weapon. I'm your wife. I have rights to that ship. I have rights to half of everything you own. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange sense of pity that was quickly replaced by a profound relief. Actually, Jennifer, you should have read the prenuptial agreement more closely 10 years ago. Section 8, Clause 4. In the event of proven infidelity or public defamation of the spouse's character, the discretionary trust remains the sole property of the grantor. My lawyers have been watching you and Julian at that hotel in the city for 3 months. I just needed the public defamation part to close the loop. You gave it to me right there in front of the bistro. Her face went from red to a ghostly, translucent white. The handbag dropped from her hand, hitting the teak deck with a dull thud. She looked at Julian, who was currently trying to slide away toward the parking lot, but the security team blocked his path. Julian, she whispered. Julian didn't even look at her. I barely know her, he stammered to the guard holding his arm. She's just some woman I met at the club. Look, I'm a respected businessman. I have a reputation. Not anymore, Julian, I said, stepping closer to the gate. I just sent a message to the board of Miller Acquisitions. I happen to be their largest silent shareholder. I've suggested a deep dive audit into your expense accounts, specifically the ones you use to fund your networking lunches with my wife. You're not just losing your membership today, you're losing your office. Julian's knees actually buckled. He sank to the ground right there on the North Pier, the linen of his expensive pants soaking up the salt water. It was a pathetic sight, the real man Jennifer had chosen, reduced to a heap of trembling fabric. I turned to Captain Miller. Captain, let's get the engines warmed up. I think I'd like to take her out to the reef. The air feels a bit thin here on the dock. With pleasure, sir, the captain replied, a small, grim smile of satisfaction on his face. He signaled to the crew, and the massive hum of the Sovereign's generators began to vibrate through the pier. As the security guards finally dragged Jennifer and Julian toward the exit, Jennifer turned back one last time. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow look. David, please. I didn't mean it. I was bored. We can fix this. I didn't answer. I simply turned my back and began walking up the gangway of my ship. I felt the grease on my hands and the weight of the wrench in my pocket, and I realized I had never felt wealthier. I wasn't just the man with the biggest boat anymore. I was the man who had finally cleared the weeds out of his garden. As the lines were tossed and the gap between the ship and the pier began to grow, I stood on the aft deck, watching the Royal Bay Yacht Club shrink into the distance. I saw 2 small figures being led through the main gates by security, their dreams of high society turning into a long, lonely walk to the parking lot. I took the $20 bill out of my pocket, the one I'd fished out of the water, and handed it to a passing steward. Do me a favor, I said. Frame this. Put it in the engine room. It's a reminder that no matter how much money you have, you should never forget the value of a man who knows how to get his hands dirty. Conclusion, the author's perspective. This story is a powerful reminder that the clothes do not make the man, and arrogance is a debt that always comes due. Jennifer and Julian built their entire identities on the surface, judging others by the dirt on their shoes rather than the character in their hearts. David's undercover life wasn't just about secrecy. It was about maintaining his integrity in a world of pretension. When you treat people like they are beneath you, you eventually find out that you were the one standing on a crumbling foundation all along. True power isn't about the yacht you own. It's about the respect you earn and the wisdom to know who truly belongs at your table. What a turnaround. If you loved seeing the underdog take back his throne, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. We post stories like this every week. Drop a comment below and tell us, what's the best revenge you've ever seen? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.